This is Foxearth Meadows. It's 12 acres of floodplain on the River Stour. It was purchased by Rocha UK, a Christian conservation charity, in 2015. And Rocha UK are seeking to engage Christians and motivate Christians to care for the natural environment. We also want to engage anyone who comes to visit this wonderful place, that they would love it, they would care about the nature of our nation and want to protect it. As the water levels at Foxearth Meadows rise through the autumn into winter, huge amounts of water are held on the meadow, which is part of the floodplain of the River Stour. Keeping rivers connected to their floodplains makes space for the river and has the effect of reducing both the flow downstream and the risk of flooding there. This is an example of a nature-based solution in flood risk management. If we defended the floodplain against the river flooding, any increase in flow would very likely cause flooding downstream. The water has to go somewhere. Floodplains and their ecology can be used to benefit water quality, store carbon, and retain the age-old attractive wetland landscapes and their wildlife. Welcome to pond number 1. As I said, we've got real good imagination here when we're naming our water bodies. I installed a post and put a screw in it to check a water level a couple of years ago, so I'm now using that as my sort of arbitrary datum to see what the water levels are doing on the site. This time of the year, that's pretty good for November. So it's about 25 millimeters above my screw. That's good for this time of year. When I came here in 2015, this was completely shaded out and there was virtually no life in it at all. So we removed a lot of the surrounding willows, which are sprouting up again, and that extra light increased the amount of plants that were growing in the reserve and the variety of them as well. We've got water starwort, water plantain, and quite a bit of sedge and burr reed growing in there as well. And it's quite clear that that has had a beneficial effect on the invertebrate life of the pond just by increasing the light levels. When we installed the boardwalk on the middle of the reserve, which we'll probably see a bit later on, this bit of leftover recycled plastic enabled us to bridge this boggy area here by pond number 1, and the water levels at this time of year are coming right up to the actual platform. In the summer they will drop. We are having difficulties maintaining the levels all year round, but that's something we're working on. It took me a while to find this particular pond, but I think it was intentional as a pond because there was a sudden dip in amongst all of this canary grass. So it's probably been dug by the person that put in the series of ponds through the whole centre of the reserve. So again, imagination reigns. This is pond number 2. It's pretty small. We redug it out in 2017, and it's been interesting to watch the cycle of plants that now go through this. We had stonewort immediately colonising the pond, which seems to have disappeared again now. But we've got water starwort in there again, water mint, celery-leaved buttercup, and pretty good invertebrate life in here when it holds water, but it will tend to dry out in the summer again. We've named this pond after its main feature. So it's a pond with an island, therefore it's called Island Pond. This is the second biggest water body on the reserve. The flow from the western ditch comes through a pipe into this pond. It was dug in the 1980s as a gravel pit and then used for trout fishing, day fishing, through the 80s and 90s. It is now one of the best features on the reserve for breeding dragonflies. And if you come in the summer, it's a fantastic sight, as you'll see hawkers and darters and chasers parading and fighting for territories along this stretch here. Looking at the vegetation, we've got common water plantain, floating pondweed, there is watercress in here, there's canary grass around the edges, a host of other wetland plants in here, including an ever-increasing reed bed. Now this reed bed was probably planted in the early 2000s and is now starting to creep into the centre of the pond. Eventually, I suppose the whole pond is likely to become a reed bed, but I'm not so worried about that, because in the summer this is where you'll find most of our breeding reed warblers, and with a few reed buntings and sedge warblers as well. In the winter you might be lucky enough to come across roosting pied wagtails, and the invertebrate life in there is pretty phenomenal. If I took my net into there, I would be finding all sorts of different invertebrates. We have found stonefly larvae on this pond, which means that the water quality is pretty good. This is one of the ponds that never dries out. The others we have been losing in the summer months, but this one always holds water. It's pond number 4. It's right in the middle of the wetland area. It's dominated by this reed mace, which probably is starting to take it out as a pond, but I'm of a mind to let that happen, and let it transition and let it succeed out as a pond through its whole life. We can always dig another pond somewhere else. In here we've got another range of plants. It's particularly good, this one actually, for thread-leaved water crowfoot, which is a really dainty plant that will flower in the spring and early summer. Continuing our watery walkabout here, this is pond 5 in the centre part of the wetland, and I'm a bit concerned about this one. It started to dry out every summer. Some of the features it used to have are sort of not really there. There was a lovely patch of lesser water parsnip growing in the water there. That's disappeared. The invertebrate life is a bit patchy, probably because it keeps drying out. We've got some interesting plants. There's a bit of water horsetail, that's probably coming up because it went down to mud. We've got water starwort, we've got float grass. It looks promising, but as I say, I'm a bit concerned about the water quality when it does fill up again. Another view of Big Pond. I've come over to this side to show you this area here is an extremely important common toad breeding area. There was an incredible activity of spawning going on in this area in the spring, as there was actually in the reed bed on the island pond. So common toad is the amphibian species that is doing very well on this site. Common frog, not so good. We get them, but in very low numbers. And as for newts, well, as I said before, it's one of my great sadnesses that I cannot find a newt anywhere on this site. And as a licensed great crested newt surveyor, I'm wondering if I've lost my mojo. Now, I'm not full of surprises. This is indeed pond number 7. Now, for some reason, although we've only walked a few paces from pond number 6, this one never dries out. We're just also a few yards away from Big Pond, which the levels always hold up here. So there's something different about the hydrology of this area, and water is maintained in this pond. It's interesting for invertebrate life, and the damselflies and the dragonflies can actually use it. Although it's only a small pond, we do get a lot of damselfly activity on it. There's a lot of water beetles, and it usually in the summer fills up with one of the pondweed species. We've also already seen floating pondweed on the island pond. This one gets absolutely choked up with a thread-leaved waterweed that's related to the floating one. It's a bit rarer and it's very interesting. So it's one of the Potamogeton species. Just a quick addition of information for ponds 5, 6 and 7. They're in a line and they are linear in shape. And if you look on the old map, you can see that there was indeed a drainage ditch going across the site. So obviously this was always wet here and it needed to be drained. And these ponds have been formed by interrupting that ditch and filling in different sections of it to leave those 3 ponds in a line. Right, okay, this is pond 8. Again, we're now at the northern end of the meadow reserve, and this is the drier part of the reserve. And yes, it's lovely and wet now. It's in the winter flood. Unfortunately, this will also dry out in the spring, which is a great shame. I think what we may do is coppice these willows. We may try and dig this out in the next year or so and make it deeper, see if we can get it to hold water for longer. But there may be something we need to actually look at with the hydrology at this end of the reserve in order to keep these ponds full.